Hi, I'm Emily, and with me is Pastor Zach. This week, your sermon covered Genesis 42. Why did Joseph select Simeon to be detained in prison?
We're not given an explicit reason in the text. I think if we were to maybe do a little bit of, we'll say, educated guesswork from the text, I think we can remove Reuben for perhaps two reasons. Reuben would seem to be the obvious. He is the firstborn. So if Joseph's going to detain any of these brothers as sort of a representative for the family, you'd think it'd be Reuben. But we need to remember, number one, who it was who originally told the brothers, we can't kill our younger brother. It was Reuben who kind of had, for lack of a better term, got a little bit weak at the knees about the prospect of killing Joseph. And we know at least secretly was intending to deliver Joseph back to Jacob. So perhaps Joseph had some recollection that even though Reuben's idea was to throw him in a pit, that Reuben was the one who at least prevented him from being killed on the spot. So maybe that's at play. Additionally, Joseph needs these brothers to go back and convince their father Jacob to bring back Benjamin. And so perhaps Joseph felt that Reuben, as his position as the firstborn, was the most likely of the brothers to be able to pull that off. That's also possible. There is some speculation in the rabbinic literature that this is a judgment on Simeon for his slaughter of the men of Shechem with his brother Levi. I think that's a little bit too speculative for my tastes, but there is at least that conversation that's happening in the early rabbinic literature. I think really it's not so much the identity of the brother that is most significant. I think really the only two men that are clearly excluded by reason of necessity are Reuben because of his role as the firstborn. He needs to be demonstrated to be an ineffective leader. And part of that is, as he goes back, we see the absurd logic that he uses with Jacob of, hey, kill my sons if I don't bring Benjamin back. We need to see that character of what Reuben looks like as an ineffective leader in order to contrast him with Judah, who we're going to see yet again reemerge in the upcoming chapters and step in as a leader of this family. So if it were either Reuben or Judah, some key character development would be missing from the narrative that's necessary for this to go forward. And so Simeon would see to be a providential choice as one of Leah's sons, but not Judah and not Reuben. And so I think that's the best in terms of information that we can construe there. We're not given a more explicit reason in the text.
Is there anything significant about Joseph imprisoning his brothers for 3 days?
It is fascinating if you were to look at the 42nd chapter of Genesis and just spend a little bit of time underlining and highlighting some repeat themes, words, or ideas. There's a number of terms that get used throughout this chapter in multiple different spots. So the concept of remembering in dreams is used in this chapter in a couple of places, which interestingly connects it back to the previous episode and 2 chapters previously where, of course, the cupbearer forgets Joseph, despite the fact that Joseph had interpreted his dream. So the phrase there, the cupbearer did not remember Joseph. So that concept of remembrance in dreams in a negative sense is then brought forward in a positive sense in chapter 42 where Joseph remembers what had happened. You have phrases like tested, or the word tested that's repeated numerous times throughout the chapter. Interestingly, we are honest men is repeated by the brothers multiple times, first to Joseph, and then that's one of the things that they recite to their father that they told Joseph. We also told him we were honest men. So it's like this is very on the top of their mind. And then we have this reference to the third day that appears twice, that the brothers are incarcerated for 3 days, and then it says on the third day. So that's back-to-back referencing to this third day, which is fascinating when we recall, again, going back previous chapters, that both the baker and the cupbearer are in prison with Joseph, and Joseph tells them, you will stand before Pharaoh again in 3 days. And on the third day, it says, they were called up by Pharaoh. And we noted at that time that was connecting with Joseph, who is this suffering servant who will emerge from the pit of prison to become ruler of Egypt and bring salvation to the world. It was connecting with Joseph this idea of a prominent third day motif or theme. And so once again, it connected with Joseph is this ongoing reference to the third day, the significance of the third day. So I think it again stands, like we noted then, of this ongoing connection to the third day and a suffering servant who brings salvation, which then gets brought forward by Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, that Christ rose again the third day according to the scriptures. This is an ongoing development of the connecting of these themes together with a third day salvation and judgment theme.
What details do the brothers change about what happened in Egypt when speaking to Jacob?
For the most part, they stick fairly close to what happened in the relaying of the events, but they definitely water it down in terms of the harshness of the way in which Joseph interacts with them, and they admit some of the details about their own imprisonment. And presumably the reason that they go a little bit light on the more aggressive details of their treatment in Egypt is they're trying to convince their dad, who already has expressed reticence about sending Benjamin because of the danger of the trip. They're trying to get Jacob on board with sending Benjamin with them. And it's already now a tougher sell than it was before because one of their brothers is currently in an Egyptian prison. So things clearly haven't gone perfectly in Egypt, but they're trying to diminish as much as possible how bad things really were, that in fact they all were in prison. And their goal at this point is they've got to find some angle to convince Jacob to send them on their way with Benjamin. And so it's a little bit ironic that they repeat the phrase, "We are honest men," which is what they told Joseph. They repeat that they mentioned that to Joseph, to their own father Jacob, while at the same time they're omitting some key details that they know would probably further prejudice their father against sending his favorite son. So once again, these brothers are perhaps a little bit less honest than they imagine themselves to be.
Do you think Jacob has begun to suspect that Joseph's brothers may have had something to do with his disappearance?
This is a very interesting part of this chapter to me. We read at the beginning of the chapter that Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Now, like we noted, if we put together the dates of how long that Joseph has been away in Egypt, he left as a 17-year-old boy. He was promoted by Pharaoh when he was 30 years old. So there's another 7 years of abundance that precede the 7 years of famine. So at minimum 20 years have transpired that Joseph's been in Egypt. So Benjamin's not a little boy anymore. He's a man. So it's a little bit curious that Jacob sees this as being an especially dangerous journey for Benjamin. I think it at least raises the question in our minds, if he's not so concerned about the safety of the other men he's sending, what is it that would cause him to be concerned about Benjamin? Is there a hint of worry in Joseph's mind that these 10 brothers, these 10 sons of his that are not Rachel's children, that they hate his favorite sons? He knew of their hostility, certainly, with Joseph. So is he beginning to wonder if things really did go down with Joseph the way that the brothers said, that he was really mauled by a wild animal? And I think that further credence is lent to that because at the end of the chapter, he says to them, to the brothers, "You bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin." Now, the question is this. One can understand how Jacob sees them of having bereaved him of Simeon. It's still a little bit of a stretch, but Reuben, your brothers were in your care. Guys, you shouldn't have come home without all of your brothers. How on earth did you get into such a mess down in Egypt that somebody thought you were spies and now one of your brothers are in prison? You've deprived me of one of my sons. But how does he get there with Joseph? And so there's either the implication here that I sent Joseph to you to see how you guys were doing, and he ends up dead of a wild animal. I think that's the nicest interpretation. Or is Jacob insinuating something more? You have bereaved me of my son. Has he come to suspect, the longer time has gone on, that their story is not quite as true to what actually happened to his son Joseph as they've led him to believe, which again would just underscore the irony of the repeated line, "We are honest men." Perhaps even their father doubts the full integrity of his sons.
In verse 23, why does it say that Joseph understood what his brothers were saying because there was a translator? Couldn't Joseph just understand them on his own?
Yep, so I'm going to go ahead and just reread verse 23 there. Speaking of the brothers, they did not know that Joseph understood them, speaking of when they were speaking to one another, for there was an interpreter between them. And what that really is saying is that there was an interpreter there who was relaying to the brothers what Joseph was speaking in Egyptian. Then the interpreter would relay it in Hebrew to these men, to the brothers. And so there was a language barrier that was being bridged by this interpreter. And the reason that note is there for us is because previous to this, Joseph is just said to be speaking to his brothers. But now we understand that he's not speaking to them in their dialect. He's speaking as an Egyptian, and there's an interpreter who is acting as the go-between, which is enhancing the brothers' perception of the fact that Joseph is this Egyptian ruler, which is aiding to the fact that they're not able to recognize him. From their perspective, the man that they're dealing with is a thoroughly Egyptian individual. The interpreter, therefore, is not the interpreter is being referenced here as helping us to understand why the brothers don't recognize Joseph and why they're not confused about the fact that this Egyptian can speak their dialect. But then we're given this parenthetical comment by Moses, the narrator, saying, of course, Joseph can speak their language, and he does overhear what they're saying. And as he understands what they imagine is a private conversation, he breaks down because he hears the guilt that they're expressing for what they had done to him 20 years ago.
After realizing they still had their money, why didn't the brothers rush back to Egypt?
That is a little bit perplexing, but I think a couple of different possible reasons there. Number one, their family needs food. They're out of food. They have food in their saddlebags. If they go back and they're charged as thieves, in all likelihood, their food never makes it to their family. So for the preservation of the family, they're at least going to go and give the food to their family first. Secondly, they're clearly perplexed about what this means. They know it's not good, but their immediate concern is not only with Joseph, but they view this as some kind of divine judgment against them. They say, what has God done to us? And so I think that reveals that they realize that the situation that they're in is maybe a little bit more sticky than simply a misunderstanding or a clerical error that can be quickly resolved by a trip back and a conversation about it. They are recognizing that this odd string of events, this Egyptian prince accusing them seemingly for no reason of being spies, then detaining them, then detaining their brother, and now look, all the money's back in our saddlebags. They're putting the pieces of these events together, and they're realizing, okay, God is clearly in this, judging us for what we've done. And so there's a hesitancy there, I think, to go back to Egypt because they recognize that that they are in the hands of God's judgment, and so there's a real fear for these men. And also, when you're fearful, that's not always the time where rational decision making wins the day, and we certainly see that even when they get home, and Reuben has really dumb ideas about what they should do next, and Jacob has some really selfish ideas about what they need to do. They're all terrified, and it just goes to show that when fear overrides faith, that our decision-making tends to pursue a foolish course.
If you have any questions from the sermon or the sermon passage that you would like to have answered on the podcast, please email them by 8 a.m. on Tuesday morning to questions@westcannon.org. We'll see you next week.